This Let's Edit with Media Composer tutorial is brought to you by VideoGuys.com, the leading reseller of video editing and production equipment for more than 25 years. And by Boris Effects, a leading developer of visual effect plugins, titling, video editing, and workflow tools for broadcast, post-production, and film professionals. Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here, and I am back again with another Let's Edit with Avid Media Composer tutorial. And in this lesson, we're going to talk exporting. Now, I know you're probably thinking, Kev, how are we even talking about exporting when we only literally just talked about creating a project, consolidating and transcoding media, and basically how to tour the interface? Well, to be honest, when I teach Media Composer, I really teach creating the project, getting the media in, and then exporting right off the bat, because really, you're going to get around and you're going to play around in a project. You're not going to wait for new tutorials, but those three concepts of the project creation, the getting the media in, and most importantly, exporting media are really the three core lessons that you absolutely need to know to get a project into and out of Media Composer. So that's why in this lesson, we're going to focus on exporting. Now, as I always do, I want to give a big shout out to my footage partner, artgrid.io. And as you can see, I always like to show off some of their fantastic footage at the start of every one of my lessons. And you can download these clips plus thousands of others at artgrid.io. All right, so let's Command or Alt and tab into Avid Media Composer. I do have a timeline here that we're going to be outputting. Now keep in mind, it's got video. The audio tracks obviously don't have anything on them, so they'll just export as silent, but you can you'll be able to see how this concept works, whether you're exporting video only or video and audio. All right, so the very first thing that I do need to point out, and this is something that I always mention when I'm teaching Avid Media Composer, is that there's really three main concepts that are exceptionally important that you get right. One is the project setting. Two is how you consolidate or transcode your media. And three is how you export. Now, how your media is exported is directly impacted by the project type that you currently are working in. Now, how do I know what type of project that I'm currently working in? Well, right down here you'll see 1920 by 1080, 23.98 frames per second. If I head on over to my Format tab, you'll see that is the same as the project preset. If I was to switch that to something like, let's just switch it to 2K, keep in mind, once I select the frame rate for the project, it is locked in there. But once I switch that over, you'll now see that gets updated down here as well. So you always have a visual idea of exactly what is going on with your project so that you know exactly how you will be exporting it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark a range in here. It doesn't really matter which range I mark because we're going to talk about what that is going to impact in just a second. Now, there's a few ways that we can export from our sequence. I'm just simply going to right click and I'm going to navigate down to export. Now, once I do that, the export as window will appear. Now, I do have a preset in here that we're going to ignore for right now because we are going to create a new preset to export this project with. Now, what I normally like to tell people when we're getting into exporting is that there's really two presets that you want to start with and then sort of create your alternate presets from there. What I normally tell people, first of all, is to create a high resolution master export preset. This way, all of your masters will be exported to the same high quality that you can then take and encode in another application like Media Encoder to create files for the web or Instagram or Snapchat or wherever they need to go to. The other type of preset you want to make is one that you're going to use for screening copies, things that you just want to throw quickly up on YouTube to give producers an idea, whether it's a string out sequence that has burn-in time code on it or other situations like that. So let's create both of those two presets so that you'll have them in your toolkit. And then again, like I said, you can start creating your own after that. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to my options. Now for me, as far as a master format to export with out of Avid Media Composer, the easiest and most direct one is an MXF OP1A export. Why would I choose that export? Well, there are a lot of facilities that will accept an MXF OP1A file exported from Avid Media Composer as an acceptable deliverable format. So that's always a good one to use, because then the file that you export could very well be your upload master. All right, so we're going to select MXF OP1A. Now I'm just going to click on the drop down here, and you'll notice that we have a whole bunch of different resolutions to choose from here. Okay, now for me, if I'm going to be exporting it as an MXF OP1A, I'm really going to choose from a DNX HD or DNX HR codec. Now, obviously, I could choose Apple ProRes, but if I want to create an Apple ProRes file, I would do that after the fact inside of an application like Adobe's Media Encoder. Now, again, there's a few other formats in here that you might need. You'll see if I scroll down here, including XD-CAM HD 50 megabits. I just want to draw that one to your attention, because I know that's a common one that people export from Media Composer all the time. Now, depending on the resolution you're outputting, you may not have access to DNX HD and DNX HR. The reason I have access to both is that my timeline is an HD timeline. So I do have the flexibility of exporting either or. If I was doing a 2K sequence or a 4K sequence, I'd be going with the DNX HR codecs. Again, you're going to tailor this to your export needs, and this is just a general guideline for you to follow. So we're going to stick with the DNX HD codecs for right now for HD. All right. Now the question is, which one would you choose for a master? Well, there's really two options, HQ and HQX. Now, to be honest, I really never did like when they changed the codecs over to being the HQ, LB, SQ, as opposed to going with the megabits per second, DNX HD 175, 220, etc., etc. What's important to keep in mind here is high quality and high quality 10-bit, which you'll obviously choose based on the type of basically the type of media you've been using in your timeline and how you acquired it. Now, for the purposes of this lesson, we're going to choose DNX HD HQ. If I was exporting a timeline that was larger than HD, I would choose DNX HR HQ, again, or X, depending on the type of media I'm working with. So we're just going to create our preset based on this. Now, the next option, I'm just going to scroll down here. You'll see the sample rate. I'm going to leave it as 48. Bits per sample, I'll leave as 24. Now, the mix is always an exceptionally important one. If you've gone through and mixed your entire timeline so that it's ready to go in stereo, you can simply export as stereo. There are many situations where you may want to export a direct out. When would you need to do that? Two very common situations. One, you have 8 channels that basically are made up by left, right, center, sub, left surround, right surround, stereo left, and stereo right, making up a 5.1 and stereo 8-channel output. The other very common situation where you would use direct out is in a situation where maybe you have a timeline that has your music and effects mixed down to a stereo track. You have music as its own stereo track. You have your sound effects as their own stereo track. Basically, you're exporting audio splits to go with a textless master. That is exactly where you would use something like direct out. Now for us, like I said, because we're using stereo, 2 channels, I'm going to choose stereo. Now, a couple other options in here, and really the two that I'm going to talk about here are use marks and use selected tracks. Now, if I leave things the way that they are right now, all that will get exported is this area to this area and these 3 channels. All right? Now, depending on your situation, you can always hop into the preset and turn these on if you want to. For me personally, I like to leave them off. What does that mean? It means the entire timeline is going to be exported and all of the tracks on the timeline are going to be exported. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to save this. And I'm going to call it MXF HQ Master. All right, and I'm going to say OK. You'll now see that I have 2 presets in here. I deleted all the presets before, but I always have to have one. So this is the one that was saved. Now, what we're also going to do is we're going to create that low-res H.264 output. Let's come back to our options. Let's go to Export As. And we really have 2 options for H.264, .mov, .mp4. The process is the same for both, so let's just choose MP4 as our option. Now again, I'm going to leave Use Marks and Use Selected Tracks disabled. You'll see the project's raster dimension is 1920 by 1080, and one thing that I love, and this is a great new feature that was added in here, is not only enable mask margins, but crop to the mask margins. Now we're going to do a lesson on mask margins, and what mask margins gives us the ability to do is to mask a certain part of the frame, for example, a 9:16 portion, and then when we export, we can actually crop the timeline to be that exact aspect ratio, which makes creating video for social media and for the web very simple and very easy. So we're going to leave this as the project's raster dimension. You'll see that we have presets as far as project sizes go. I'm going to leave it just on its preset for 1920 by 1080. You'll see 16 by 9, 1.0 to 1, aspect ratio is 1 to 1. And you'll see the source scaling right now is set to stretch. It actually doesn't matter in this case because we're not making any adjustments to the aspect ratio or anything like that of our timeline. We're going to leave the frame rate exactly the way that it is. We'll leave the color space the way that it is. I'm going to keep it as a legal range. And what we're going to do is I'm going to come to the codec family and I'm going to change that to be H.264. You'll see that we can now get in and choose not only the compression, but the color depth, which is standard at 8-bit, but also the encoding method. If you want to go with a variable bitrate single pass, you can set this. And normally for me, as far as quality goes, I set the target bitrate to be 8 with the max bitrate to be 12. I'm not going crazy here when I export, but I want the quality to be half decent. And again, much like the audio options that we had when we were exporting our MXF master, I'm going to leave this as stereo for our export. I'm going to come down and say save as. We're going to call this H.264 screening export. Now, I'm going to say OK, and I'm actually just going to cancel out of that for a second because I want to show you what's been happening in our settings. Now, we haven't gone in depth to talk about settings because, like I said, the three most important concepts you know right off the bat are project settings, consolidating and transcoding, and exporting. But if I go into my project settings, Control Shift and equals, Command Shift and equals for all my Mac friends out there, and I head on over to my user settings, you'll now see that if I navigate right down here, here are those three export settings, one of which was there by default that I'm actually just going to delete. But you'll see now that what I can do is actually toggle back and forth between those two export presets. So when I'm ready to export, if I just move this window out of the way, you'll see that I've created the MXF HQ master. I've selected the MXF HQ master export preset. If I come over to export, you'll see that's now selected by default, and I'm ready to export this entire timeline with the stereo audio to my desktop, to my external drive, wherever I'm going to export it to either deliver it or even in this case, potentially flip it over using Adobe's Media Encoder to a ProRes file for me to then deliver to wherever it needs to go to. All right, now as we're wrapping up, I want to remind you to check out our sponsors, Video Guys, for all of your Avid software and hardware, as well as thousands of other products that you can check out over at videoguys.com. And I also want to give a big shout out to the team at Boris FX, makers of Continuum, Sapphire, and Mocha. And don't forget to use that coupon code of MC101 to get 10% off your next Continuum purchase. If you like this tutorial, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And don't forget, if you have any questions, you have any comments, or you have any tutorial requests, don't hesitate to send them to me at kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com. This has been Kevin P. McAuliffe. Thanks a lot for watching.